Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, the Community First ECC, Meeting Today's Callers Where They Are, sponsored by Aurelian. Before we get started, there are just a few housekeeping notes to go over. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available online. You have joined in listen-only mode. This helps avoid background noise throughout the webinar. We want this to be as interactive as possible, so please feel free to ask your questions at any time throughout the webinar. The team will answer them at the end of the presentation. If you would like to ask a question, please use the question box in the control panel located on the right side of your screen. We will try to get to as many questions as possible. With that, I'm excited to introduce our speakers. Max Keenan is the co-founder and CEO of Aurelian, which helps 911 centers reduce non-emergency calls so dispatchers can stay focused on real emergencies. Now I'm going to turn it over to Max to introduce the remaining speakers.
Well, thank you, Lisa, for introducing us. And before I get to introducing my wonderful co-panelists, some of them who've already joined us before, I want to talk a little bit about what we're talking about today. And really what it is how do we meet the expectations of the community? And a few of them I think are kind of funny. And I say that they're kind of funny because I think I had these expectations before I started working at 911. One of them is just like, they expect you to know with, I don't know, NSA level knowledge exactly where they are at any given time. The other is that like they expect you to do two things that I think are kind of contradictory in some ways. One, they expect you to answer every single call immediately. And they also expect you to spend an endless, sometimes, amount of time with them on the actual calls. And today we're going to kind of talk about kind of balancing those last two pieces and how you can kind of have a productive relationship with the community and doing it in a way that actually provides them that level of service and trying to meet that level of service. But before we really get into that, I want to start off by introducing my co-presenters. And Samantha, I'll let you kind of kick it off. Can you give like a quick introduction about yourself and your role and about SECC?
My name is Samantha Fickes. I'm the Deputy Director of Administration at Summit Emergency Communications Center. We're located in Talmadge, Ohio. We started using Aurelian last June. So I was very big on helping implement Aurelian here at our dispatch center. We dispatch for 11 police departments and 8 fire departments. So our call volume, non-emergency wise, is about 230,000 calls a year. And our 911s are about 70,000. So Aurelian has been really helpful in making sure that we get all those calls answered in a timely manner.
Good.
I'm Gwen Stanley. I am the operations manager for Southeast Communications in Eastern Washington. We went live with Aurelian earlier this year. We dispatch for 2 different counties, and we have 17 different agencies. Our call volume, we break it down by month, is about 20,000 calls each month. And we've noticed a significant difference using Aurelian, especially during our busy summer season with wildfires. And it's really kind of given our community an extra option on how they reach us and how we can handle their call volume more quickly.
And Leanne Slaughter, Deputy Director of Operations, also with Samantha at the Summit Emergency Communications Center. I was alongside Samantha and the team for implementation and have watched it continuously help the center on the floor. And we've also been working with the agencies that we dispatch for in the community, which I know we'll talk about later, but we've seen a lot of good things come out of the system, and it's been a pleasure to work with all of you and to watch it grow.
I'll just kind of turn this over to Summit. I would just be kind of interested in, like, when you talk about these expectations that the community has, like, what are the ones that are most obvious to you on the dispatch side, especially now as you're spending a lot of time talking to the community about this?
I'll start. I think that initially it was a surprise. It was new for them. And so it's taken we've had to go to them and meet them where they're at with that. Lots of different views that are coming to the table about AI and lots of different customers. And I think it's hard to plan for that, if you will. But it has, over time and more experience and exposure and education, information and all that, we've seen it get better. Even people that don't like AI have left comments about how intuitive it is and how surprised they were at how well it could help them get the same result without talking with a dispatcher.
Yeah, and kind of going back, like before you guys even implemented this, what was like part of the spark? Like I think like maybe talk about like the kind of the balance between 911 and non-emergency and the expectations of the community back then that kind of like maybe led you to even thinking about AI solutions.
Well, I think the director of our center is extremely innovative and saw what help this could be for the floor. When we stood up the center in 2023, when it began, there were a multitude of ancillary duties that came into the center that were considered as part of the consolidation that maybe weren't brought to light before that, because a lot of things were handled by the individual dispatch centers, and over years that snowballed. So there was an appetite to take some of that out of the room, or not really out of the room, just deliver it in a different way to allow them to process the calls a different way. So I don't know if Samantha has anything to add on that, but I think that was a driving force for a way to integrate the technology with the need that we saw that could help them, because some of them don't need that dispatcher to answer those questions.
Yeah, and we've also talked about just the not only the workload, but the constant ringing of the phone. So if you're on a 911 call and you're trying to handle a more serious call, but the phone is ringing in the background, even though it is a non-emergency call ringing, dispatchers always are like, okay, I got to rush to finish this call to get to the next call, but that next call might be asking to be transferred to records. So those calls being answered by Aurelian really allows our dispatchers not only to give their full attention and time to those more urgent calls, but it also really is a mental health and wellness thing for the dispatchers, because they're not feeling that stress of having to try to rush through everything and get to the next call, and they can actually focus on that call the way they want to.
Yeah, that makes sense. Can you talk a little bit more about that focus piece? Like one of the things, it's funny, like what got me into call automation as a whole, and we talked about the story a lot of how I originally was actually automating calls for hair salons. But before that, I was actually like, there was this specific moment that I remember being incredibly frustrated. It was I went into my dentist office and I was getting ready to check in. I was having a nightmare of a day. And I'm talking to the receptionist, and then she puts me on hold when I'm in person. And she's like, let me answer this call real quick. She answers the call and then gets back to me. And then another call comes in and she's like, sorry, just 2 more minutes. And like that experience to me was like one of the most frustrating things I think I've ever dealt with. I'm not a very patient person, so that doesn't help at all. But I remember like one of the things, Samantha, we talked about this, a month or so ago when we did a webinar about the last storm, or one of the last really bad storms you all had. Can you talk about that, like community expectation to always get their call answered and to never be placed on hold and to get the time that they need?
We just had another one this past weekend.
Great. Sorry.
We love storms around here, apparently. No, when weather, I think most dispatchers know this too. The weather is the most unpredictable thing that we literally cannot control, and the amount of calls you get for weather, whether it's the power out or trees down or wires down. But the storm you're talking about was on March 13th, and it impacted all 11 of our communities. A lot of times when we have storms, we're lucky enough that it only impacts a couple of our communities. But this particular storm literally impacted all 11 of our communities. So in about a 2-hour time, something like 550 calls came into Aurelian, and Aurelian was able to handle about 400 of those and get that information for the dispatchers, where the tree was, where the wire was. So yes, we got to those calls and we were able to send either PD or FD out to check on it. But in the past, without Aurelian, realistically, there's no way all 550 of those calls would have been answered. Plus 911s are ringing. There's just not enough people in the room. There's not enough phones. We had every station manned. People came in on overtime to help us, but you just cannot answer those calls. Now, every one of those calls does get answered. and we do get to their call. It might be longer than the caller would like, but realistically in the past, that phone would just ring and ring and ring, and they eventually would have gotten just frustrated and hung up, and we never would have gotten the information they were trying to call about. And in the meantime, we're actually able to focus on the 911 calls that are actually coming in. Now, we all know some of those may have been the non-emergency type things when they couldn't get through, or they got Aurelian. But then when we do have the people who are having medical issues, or because they're out of power and their oxygen tank is running out, we're actually able to get to those calls and prioritize those over just the tree down in my yard that, yes, we need to go out and help them, but it's not as urgent.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And then, Gwen, I know you're 2,000 miles away from Summit, but I think you guys are often surprisingly similar. And for context for the audience, Richland, Washington, where CCOM is, I would like to say to me, it's the nightmare combination of a very dry area and also a group of people that just love the 4th of July. Like I saw a video the other day from Richland, and it looked like almost like the skies of Fallujah, just with the number of fireworks going off. And obviously, you can imagine that combination with a huge fire risk area is just a nightmare for the center. I think actually last time I was there, Gwen, there was a fire that was approaching the center, and I remember being like, "Wow, that's really close," and you being like, "Actually, last time it was a lot closer. It was like on our front door." Can you talk about what that was like for you all and kind of handling that situation a little bit?
Yeah. So for the 4th of July, we typically, so in a given day, we handle maybe a couple hundred calls throughout the night between like 19 and midnight. So those 5 hours. And on the 4th of July, our community loves setting off all types of fireworks. We took 1,500 calls in that same time frame that we would normally have about 250. So it's anywhere from where can I set fireworks off to, small fires being started, people using them in an unsafe manner, what hours, people's losing their pets, they're getting out, all different kinds of things. And what was great about Aurelian is we have so many calls coming in that we couldn't possibly answer all of them. So the ones that just truly needed information, they were able to get a text link on where they could go to find where the community events were, where parking was, where the hours of setting off fireworks. If you lost a pet, this is where you can go to, check it and post it if you found one. So that has been super helpful for us. And it was really cool to see, because then we could focus on the true emergencies with all the small fires. And we're still setting fires off apparently with extra fireworks. So that's just kind of the area that we live in. We have lots of wildfires.
That makes a lot of sense. I appreciate that contact. It's funny because like for an area that loves fireworks so much, it has to be like the worst area in the U.S. to light them off on the 4th of July.
It is.
And I like explicitly remember seeing this video, and it was just like, it was unbelievable. It's from like one of the hills looking over Richland, and it looked like it was like New York City lighting off fireworks. But as we kind of like take a step back, talk more about the general events. Like one of the things that I think often surprised me about this from the outside perspective is how, like in many ways, the PSAP has become like de facto 311. Especially if you don't have a true 311, like in Summit County, you get Akron has one, but the rest of the county doesn't really have 311. How do you think about like delivering this level of service that they're expecting for you to basically, sometimes literally Google things on their behalf?
Max, who is that to? Sorry.
Anyone.
That's us. Okay. We've leveraged a ton with providing the community events, the dates, the times, anything that we can ingest ahead of time and get over to Seth and the team on your side to provide that as an option. We had watched somebody actually go through and ask for multiple fireworks information from each community. They just kept asking Ava, like, what about this community? What about this community? And you just saw her texting out all the, the times, rain dates, all that information. And it was it was extremely helpful that they could get what they needed, and that could be provided outside of the dispatch center. And we have continued to leverage that and update that as we get information in from, the communities that we contract with. We recently just had a parade, and part of the addresses are locked by this parade route. And we have the community actually reaching out to us to leverage that information for, I know the other side of Ava for Cora to be able to provide information to the call takers that those addresses are in that parade route, so they get dispatched to a different group of people. Like, it's been amazing to leverage sending that information out to them, as well as then helping our staff recognize it right away.
And we got a question, and I'm going to ask you to answer this, Leanne. We get a question from Nani, who asked, I'm sorry if I mispronounced that, did you set it up ahead of time so Aurelian knew to send that link with the information for fireworks and things like that? Or how did that process work?
Yes, we try, and just like you normally would, try and gather from the agencies the information for the dispatchers ahead of time, because those calls are going to come in. So we try and set out a couple months ahead of time once those announcements start getting made, and ask for that information, and then send it over to Seth on the Aurelian side, and they set those text messages and even links up. And I mean, it's never ending. She'll offer to read it, text it, anything, but send it into the dispatch center to get them that information. And people also gave feedback that they liked it, because once they got it on their device, then they could share it. It's not like they're on the phone with the dispatcher trying to write it down, and then they're like, inevitably driving somewhere. And so they're like, oh no, I'll just call back later. So they had it, and they could have it back to reference and share out with other people if it was sent to their device.
Yeah. Thank you for answering that. And then kind of just talking a little bit about the numbers, and I'll let you, Samantha, start us off. Like, one of the things that always really excites me is like the idea that we can stop people from waiting on hold. I talked about not being patient. That is probably one of my biggest drivers to doing this. But I'd love to just hear like a little bit of like what this has meant for your community and your callers.
Yeah, like I said, especially when we were talking about the storm, there's never a time a call doesn't get answered now. And that could have been a possibility in the past, especially when you have these large events. But even day to day, I know some people feel like AI slows things down, but I don't think it does. When they're calling about something like they need a police report, because we are multi-jurisdictional, that dispatcher has to take the time, figure out what department that is, make sure they can find in the phone where to transfer that to, make sure they're transferring it to the correct department. We build all that in the background. So as soon as they call and they say, I need a copy of police report, Aurelian will ask, what department do you need it from? They say one of our department names, and she immediately transfers them. And it is a lot faster than if we were involved in it. So it's just getting that service to the callers faster. But because it is different, sometimes at the beginning, callers are like not as in love with it until they experience it. And then, we do see the feedback, and some of our feedback has been, I really dislike AI, but this was really intuitive and worked really well. So like once people give it a shot and they realize how well it works, but it just really helps make sure all those calls get answered. We've all been in a center when things happen, whether it's the car accident, you're just getting all those phone calls at one time on 911 and non-emergency. So it's hard to get to every single call. So with really answering them, every caller is getting answered, and they may not realize it because they don't work in a dispatch center, but we definitely see the impact because we don't have those abandoned calls. Like everything does, and it all gets reviewed by the dispatcher. So if they hang up, we can see they hang up, and if we need to call back for further information, if they didn't give us enough, then we can do that. But before, they would have just hung up and we would have had nothing.
Yeah. And Gwen, I know you guys went live a little bit more recently. I think it was January, February this year?
Yep.
Yeah. How has that been? How's that kind of met your expectations and your callers' expectations?
Yeah. So it's our community. They either love it and they're embracing it, or, they really don't want to use AI because they've had a bad experience. And I think anytime that you've interacted with any type of AI system, you're going to compare the next system automatically to that one, whether it's good or bad. And what I really appreciate is when a caller starts interacting with Ava, even if they decide that they do want to talk to a person, which, you know, we allow pretty easily, we can see the whole transcript. We can see the conversation that was started. So we don't have to start from scratch. It saves us a lot of time. We can read through the transcript, have a general idea of what they need and where they need to go. So even if we do end up talking to them, it cuts down our time with them and they don't feel rushed. They still feel like they've been helped and that they had that personal experience with us, but we're still being able to focus on the majority of our emergencies instead of, you know, starting this a call from the very beginning. And that's been really helpful for us.
Awesome. And part of this that I always like to kind of talk about is like, how does this actually feel for the community to interact with? And so we actually have a call example. I'll give a forewarning here. We've edited out the name and phone number, so there might be a little bit of like choppy sections of the editing. I will say we're a lot better at AI than we are at editing audio. And we should probably just redacted it in a way that made it seem less choppy. But otherwise, this call is exactly as the call taker experienced it, the caller experienced it. You'll see a little bit of how it's actually interacting with them and answering or giving them context and collecting the information. And for context, this is actually a vehicle lockout call that happened in Summit County. And I'll let Leanne talk a little bit about how they handle these calls afterwards too.
This is a recorded automated assistant. If this is an emergency, please hang up and dial 911.
Summit Emergency Communications Center's non-emergency line. My name is Ava. How can I help you?
It's that white car. Yeah, I know.
Okay, let me see what we can do. What's going on with the white car?
I need somebody to come out and unlock it at Queen of Heaven Church.
1 second. Okay, so is anyone, including any pets, locked inside the car right now?
No.
And essentially what we're doing here is we're triaging to see, like, is there a baby inside the car? Because obviously if there's a baby inside the car, that's a higher priority. But it seems like right now we just have a woman who locked her keys in the car. Oops.
This is a
Let me see what we church. 1 second. Okay, so is anyone, including any pets, locked inside the car right now?
No.
All right. Can I have your full name?
We redacted
Just to
this.
confirm, is Queen of Heaven Church at 1800 Steese Road in Green the correct incident location?
Yes.
Understood. Chris, is the best number to reach you at?
Yes.
All right. What kind of white car is it? Do you know the make or model?
It's a Nissan Rogue 2020. I'm here now.
Where exactly is your Nissan parked at Queen of Heaven Church? Like which lot or row and near what landmark or entrance?
Just in front of the church.
All right. Is there anything else about you, the car, or the situation that you think the dispatcher should know?
No, I just need it unlocked.
Okay. You told me you're at Queen of Heaven Church at 1800 Steese Road in Green, with a white 2020 Nissan Rogue parked in front of the church. No people or animals locked inside, and your name is with callback number 1, and you just need the car unlocked. Is all of that correct?
Correct.
Then we go and we actually submit the information just like this, and you can see the transcript of the conversation and everything that we did to the call taker to review in CAD. And I'll kind of let Leanne and Samantha talk a little bit about this process and kind of how they handle vehicle lockouts.
Yeah, so the dispatcher or call taker will have it presented to them on the dashboard, and they'll take over the call so that nobody else on the floor does. Everybody can still see it, but it just lets everybody know that they're taking ownership of it and processing it. I imagine that our process is very similar to a lot of agencies where we'll look through the transcript, verify the information, enter it into the CAD system, and then the call gets dispatched to the district car for that area. Once the dashboard calls all entered and the dispatcher no longer needs it, then they'll create a resolution for it or mark it that a call in CAD was created. And what's nice is that they'll enter that call for service number. So later on, if any of the supervisors, anybody needs to reference back or tie that to the call in CAD, we can do it through that number. But then by doing that, it'll also send that caller, if they're on a wireless device, a notification text that their call was received and was processed and call was created. We also have our external feedback turned on, so they have an opportunity to leave some feedback, but then it completes that communication circle so they know that the information was received. And then the officer or deputy will get dispatched out and handle the call.
And for you all, do you all respond to every vehicle lockout, or do only certain jurisdictions respond to vehicle lockouts?
They all go, to be
Yeah, I was
honest.
gonna say,
Yeah. I was also going to point out too, the nice part is out of this summary, the dispatchers can copy and paste. So it can help them to create the CAD call quicker. So they can copy the person's name, the person's phone number. They can copy the synopsis. So the top left corner where it says locked out, white 2020 Nissan. That was a change that I know Aurelian made recently, because it used to be all proper, lowercase, uppercase, punctuation, but most of us know that's not how we type in CAD. And it was more difficult for us to read and for our responders to read. So they've changed it to be more of a synopsis in all caps. And that has gotten a better reaction from both dispatch and the responders to be able to read those synopsises. So the calls we don't do the CAD sync right now, where you could sync these calls straight into CAD, and we're not utilizing that right now, but they do copy and paste a lot out of here. So the calls are still created very quickly.
And then on the vehicle lockout piece, so every one of your police agencies you dispatch for, they all respond to vehicle lockouts?
They do.
And then Gwen, is that the case for you all? I feel like it's not.
It's not. No, we only have a couple of our agencies that will respond to lockouts. So we have it set up to where if it identifies a location in one of those jurisdictions, it'll create the call for us to send an officer. If not, it'll give the caller other options on how to go about resolving and other resources that might be available to them.
Yep. So Latoya asked a question and said, for the keys and vehicle example, does the AI utilize location verification for how to proceed? So to answer directly, it does. And so if you have some jurisdictions that don't respond to vehicle lockouts and they tell them to kick rocks and call a tow truck company, we can kind of do that as well and then map it based on where that caller actually is. And you'll see here, like the caller just said they're at the Queen of Heaven Church, and we're able to actually realize that, okay, Queen of Heaven Church is actually this location. You know, I talked about this a little bit on the 911 side of like callers having this expectation of, you know, exactly where they are at all given times. I often find that they have the similar feeling on the non-emergency side as well, which is obviously like infinitely more frustrating because we're not getting alley or anything like that. Oftentimes they'll say things like, I'm at the Starbucks. And it's like, great. You know, in Seattle, there's probably 100 different Starbuckses. And so then we kind of have to be able to ask those questions to narrow down the actual location. Now, one of the other pieces that we talked a little bit about that I think is actually really interesting, you'll see this in this call here, is that callers also just have this expectation that they can just have like infinite of the call taker's time. And I think that this is like something that is one of my favorite things that we can actually kind of match. And you'll see this in this, we might not play all of it, but it's about a 6-minute call of somebody complaining about, in this case, people driving bikes.
Southeast Communications Center non-emergency dispatch. Press 1 for additional language options. My name is Ava and I'm an automated assistant. How can I help?
Ava, my name is Kathy, and I am a resident of Richland. My husband and I walk along the bike path down the Columbia often, and we have noticed lately a huge increase in throttle bikes. Not just e-bikes, but the ones that use throttles. And they go way too fast. So I'm wondering if there's any way the city can outlaw throttle bikes on the.
1 second. Let me see what options I can find. Where exactly along the bike path are you seeing this? Like a nearby cross street or landmark?
Well, it's the whole bike path. So up by Howard Amon down to Columbia Point Marina.
Give me 1 moment. Tell me what you'd like done about these throttle bikes, like education, signage, or enforcement.
Signage and enforcement. It's very, very, very dangerous.
Yeah, if you do
We actually hear someone in the background
What's your home
talking
address?
about it.
300.
And then we'll go in and basically, through this conversation, we collect all of that information from the caller. And then at the end, we kind of obviously do the same thing, where we kind of collect it, present it to the telecommunicator, and be able to go down this. In this case, what we actually kind of match it to is like, this is a public nuisance. And so we think, okay, we have this public nuisance call at this location, and you can create the call for service there. And what I think is interesting about this call is like, this is a call that is 5 minutes and 40 seconds. This is definitely probably, like, if I had to guess, it's probably like 80th percentile call duration for us. And we're basically, in this case, I think it's interesting because the caller even just says like, hey, Ava, and talks to it as if it's a person, and kind of has this whole narrative around the situation. And one of the things that I think is kind of interesting here is at the very end, we've kind of skipped this a little bit. She actually says, I'm glad you have this automated assistant. It makes it really, really easy. Looking forward to having some action taken. And I think that like that is a point that we're trying to impress of like, how can we meet the community's expectation that somebody is going to be able to spend 5 minutes and 40 seconds listening to them talk about throttle bikes in their community? Gwen, I'm curious if you have any thoughts on this.
Yeah, so Richland, they expect a certain higher level of service sometimes than some of our other cities. And it is an older community, and they do like to talk. They don't want to be brushed off the phone. They want to feel like they are heard and that you're taking their concerns seriously. And that's one of the great things about using this is they can spend all the time in the world explaining every concern that they have, and she'll capture it for us. If that had been taken by a telecommunicator, you know, we have to go on to the next call. So we would have cut her off. We would have directed her a little bit more, not let her speak as much. So this, I think, gives them another option that if you're in a hurry and you want to talk to us, great. And if not, we still get all the information and you feel like you're truly being heard and that everyone understands what the concern is.
And I think one of the points, and Samantha and Leanne and Gwen both kind of brought this up, is like, when you think about these systems, a lot of people talk about like what this actually means for the center. And I think the value to the center is really obvious. It's, hey, you can spend less time on non-emergency calls. But I think the point that often gets kind of misunderstood is like, if you aren't creating value for the community, it's not worth it. And I think like one of the things that we've been really trying to focus in on is like actually getting feedback from the community. And so these are some of the ones that we've actually kind of put together and shown. But there's some tailwinds that we're going up against, or really rather, sorry, there's some headwinds we're going up against. Like people don't love the idea of AI taking calls. And it makes sense. Like I use this example relatively frequently because I do this a lot, traveling a lot for work. Is like I had to call Marriott the other day, and it was a nightmarish experience dealing with their AI. And I was like, at the end, I was like pressing 0 over and over again, being like, I'm never going to book a Marriott unless you answer my freaking phone call. And I think like that is some of the resistance that we're going to naturally see. And so I think it's important that we can actually like convince them that this is useful. And the piece that I kind of love the most from Summit is, although AI phone agents are annoying, your system may be the best I've encountered. Like that is like what makes my life. And I think these are the expectations, especially when you're dealing with public safety, that the community has for you. And I'm curious, you know, Leanne and Samantha, if you could talk a little bit about the expectations that you've seen in Summit.
Yeah, most of the callers are somewhat frustrated, maybe half and half, for the reason that they're calling already. And then hearing the automated assistant start out the call, some of them just, aren't that receptive to it, but more and more we start seeing them interact with it. And like Gwen said before, it is really amazing to see that information exchange go back and forth and see that it, gets to the same result, and they end up getting to say everything that they wanted to say. There are, just like we talked about before, and I couldn't agree with you more, that you're up against a lot. There's just a lot of different views of AI, and I also agree with past experiences. And I think the director said it once, and I agree with him, that I've become a better caller to AI since going through this process here, and have tried to share that with friends and family, because I'm a much more patient caller when I'm calling about something and getting AI now. But the education is huge for them. Fair warning on some of the feedback. There's quite a lot of the feedback we get that are related to how the call was handled once it left us and was out handled by the agencies. And so it is important to look at that, because they may not like the outcome of what the police department did or what was handled out on scene. And sometimes it gets reflected in your feedback. And we even have had some that say, the call went great, but after that it went downhill. So it's take it in stride and take the time to review those and understand where they're coming from.
Yeah. That's always, I always feel like people don't necessarily quite understand that the dispatch center and the agencies responding are kind of separate and distinct. Like, it's not like an officer answering the call. But yeah, what's interesting is, I think for you all, we're kind of average like 4 out of 5 stars, right around now. And what's interesting about that is, you look at the negative reviews, about 60 to 80% of them are about the actual officers, which was kind of surprising to me that there was kind of that ratio. And I think, we mentioned this idea of I think a term that I've heard tossed around, robophobic. I think a lot of it is it's the responsibility of the system to be able to know and understand and actually convince the caller that this is worth their time. And part of that is the system needs to be able to actually provide value to the caller. And I think once you're able to provide value, it becomes easier, progressively easier, to then kind of convince the caller that this is something that they should be spending their time on. But at the end of the day, I also think it's incredibly important with a system like this that callers have the ability to escalate their call and get out of it. I think I always like to say is you don't want to hold them at gunpoint in this. Part of the expectation also is that if they really need to, they should have the ability to reach a telecommunicator at any time. And then, another piece, you kind of mentioned this a little bit, and I think this is something that we're seeing more and more of our agencies do, is kind of building that relationship with the community. And I'll kind of skip around a little bit. Can you talk about kind of the community outreach that you all have done to build awareness? And can you talk about some of the reactions that they've had?
Yeah, Samantha, I'd like to
Sure.
defer it over to her, because you were heavily involved in this.
We've done a lot of community outreach because we did not have as much support as we probably would have loved from our partners, mainly our police agencies, when we went through with this. So, one of the things they asked for was community outreach. So we have spent a lot of time this summer. Our training coordinator has made a ton of amazing brochures and, one-page sheets like the one on this slide about meeting Ava that we can give out at public events. Leanne and I have gone to, council meetings or trustee meetings to explain it to their councils. Last week we went to a Rotary Club. Tomorrow we're going to a senior event that we just got a number for. There's going to be about 150 people there. And we're taking advantage of that, not only to explain how Aurelian works and how Ava works, but also when it's appropriate to call 911 versus calling non-emergency, because I do think there's confusion there and people really don't know the difference. We are at so many of our community events throughout the summer here. Every weekend, we're asking dispatchers to go out and work a table. And for the most part, when people come up and talk to them, they're not getting negative feedback from the public. They just want to have someone that they can ask questions to. And then when we answer their questions and explain how it works, explain to them to talk to her like a human. That is one of the biggest things. And secondly, that it is your local dispatchers that are reviewing these calls. They're not going off to Aurelian or India or wherever. It's still your local agency. We haven't replaced any dispatchers. We are actually still hiring. Like, we still have the same amount of people here doing the job. They're just looking at it in a different way so we can focus on those 911s. And when you can have that conversation with people face to face and explain why we're doing it, they're so much more receptive. And I do think our external feedback has shown that, because I think our external feedback has gotten better in the past couple months as we've really been out there. Leanne was on the radio about a month ago. I did a news story with one of our local news channels, just trying to get the word out of what this is and what it isn't, because I think a lot of people just think we're trying to replace people with AI and that they're not going to get the same kind of service. And that's nothing further from the truth, but they just need that education because it is so new in the public safety space. So the community outreach for us has been huge. I think it's really been changing a lot of people's minds in our area, which is really helpful because there's a few other dispatch centers in our county that are also on Aurelian. So I like said, one of our council meetings will be on tour all summer. And I think we're helping just our entire county, people getting the information out and getting more comfortable with the AI at the police department or at the dispatch centers.
Well, yeah, thank you for talking about that. The other piece I think is kind of interesting about this, we talk about meeting the expectations. There's kind of like two pieces of this that I think are really interesting. And Gwen, I'll let you kind of start off on talking about the language piece a little bit here.
Yeah, I think that is one of the best features. We have a large Spanish-speaking community, some Russian and some Bosnian, and it can be really frustrating for a caller and time-consuming to try to find an interpreter for a non-emergency. 911 obviously goes through faster, but non-emergency, it can take a couple minutes to get somebody on the line, and they're super frustrated with that. And Ava, it can speak their language, and it gives them an option to tell what it is that they need, and she interprets it in a fast, easy way and summarizes it for us. So it's been amazing. It's been a lot of time saving for us, but a far better experience for our caller.
It's one of those things I feel like, especially as we have a few agencies that had FIFA games, we were talking about the World Cup a little bit before we got on. Oftentimes, if you don't speak English, you almost get like a second class level of service, kind of by force. Like it's hard to have, even when you do get a translator on, the experience is kind of nightmarish at times. And so being able just to kind of directly interact with their caller in their natural language is something really exciting to me. The other piece, and I think this is an expectation that I'm seeing more and more, and maybe it's part of my generation pushing this, I say as I roll my eyes a little bit. The idea of like, why are you even picking up the phone and calling the center in the first place? Like it's an interesting combination where it's like the callers don't want to call. They don't really have any other way of getting non-emergency law enforcement help. And being able to use kind of like web chat and other forms have been really exciting, as like being able to expand the ways that people can get service, whether it be through texting or whether it be going through a website. And they don't necessarily have to pick up the phone every single time they need a little noise complaint or something to that effect. One point, and we talked about this a little bit, and I think this is good on the community side too, Samantha, is that like, although these calls are maybe not emergencies, I think it's really important that the community knows that you're still taking them seriously and they're still really important. I think it's often conflated, non-emergency and not important, but these calls are important, and they're often the number one way that people interact with law enforcement. So being able to give them fast, receptive service, I think matters a lot. And now, one of the last pieces I do want to talk about is I think it'd be interesting to just talk about kind of the concerns. Like in general, recently I feel like I've been on a news tour too, and I've probably done 15 or 20 segments kind of across the U.S. in the last few months. One of the questions I always get are two things. One, are you taking 911 calls, which we obviously know isn't the case. But the second is this taking people's jobs? And Samantha, you mentioned this a little bit. Can you talk a little bit about how you guys are thinking about that? Is that the plan? Where do you kind of see this fitting in?
No, it's absolutely not taking anyone's jobs. The dispatchers still review all these calls. They're just able to review them after they handle the emergent call. One of the community events I went to, they asked you for a question right there, how long before someone reviews it? And I go, oh, and before I could even finish my sentence, she goes, is it like a week? And I just started laughing, and I was like 3 to 4 minutes maybe. And she's like, oh, okay. But there is that, like, you know, people just don't understand how it works until we tell them. So they really think that if they're calling in this noise complaint or something that's a little less urgent, that no one's looking at for days or weeks at a time, and it's maybe 3 to 4 minutes. Now, yeah, during our large storm, maybe we didn't get to some of these calls for 30 minutes because we had such an influx of calls, but that's obviously not our norm. But it's definitely not taking anyone's job. We have just as many call takers as we've had. They're just able to be more efficient now. So that's a big thing. And, you know, like I said earlier, it just helps those that are call taking to not feel that constant stress of the phone ringing all the time. So they're able to do their job better. And when they leave at the end of the day, they're just not as, you know, they don't have that quite that exhaustion or quite that like, oh, I can't believe I made it through that day, because the phone's just not constantly ringing, and they're able to handle these calls in a different way where they are not feeling as rushed.
Gwen, I'm curious kind of your perspective on these concerns too.
Yeah, I think our biggest questions from our community was making sure that somebody was reviewing the information and how quickly we were reviewing it. And we've been understaffed for several years. We have, 13 openings pretty consistently. Our radio dispatchers are helping answer 911s and non-emergencies. So this truly helps them out, where our call takers can focus on the 911s and the true emergencies, and the radio dispatchers can handle the calls that come in Aurelian, and they get it fairly quickly, and it doesn't take away a distraction from their radio or what the officers are reporting or anything like that. So they kind of feel, more supported, that they're able to multitask in a different way and still help out with the call volume and feel like they're still part of a team, but not taken away from that radio piece. So I think that's super important when we're sharing it with our community, how that works and why it's so important of a tool for us to use. So
yeah, I think we're starting to see more and more, especially union PSAPs, like starting to be concerned about this idea of like taking jobs. And I think like what I find is that I think AI is really scary. And I think a lot of it, like, I think some of it's like justified. Like, I think it's like reasonable that to be worried about this, because things are changing very quickly. And there's a few things that I think about particularly with this. One, I think it's kind of like, I think non-emergency calls to some extent, especially the scope and breadth that have been coming into a PSAP, is almost like an overstepping of the roles and responsibilities that has slowly creeped up over time. And part of this was like, PSAPs are the only 24/7 call center in most areas. Even if you have a 311, most of them are only open 8 to 5. And so you end up with a situation where the PSAP kind of becomes like the dumping ground for all of these calls. And more than like automating work, what I like to think about this as is like, we're almost trying to like reclaim your time and reclaim the pieces that, made you actually join this job in the first place, right? Like handling 911 calls and dealing with radio traffic and helping first responders and, in many ways, saving people's lives. And I think that to me is like the most exciting part about all of this. And it's not about taking people's jobs. It's really about focusing on the emergencies, helping people have better quality of life, helping fill and really enhance the role of the existing telecommunicators to be as productive as possible. And kind of as we start transitioning into Q&A, I'll open it up right beforehand. Any last pieces that we didn't mention? I'm going to lean to you, Gwen.
Yeah, to touch base on the is this taking jobs, I think every center across, the U.S. can say, even if they were fully staffed, their community is growing, and it's harder to manage all of the tasks that are dumped on 911 and non-emergency and dispatchers. And this is just a tool that helps them manage that workload without feeling the pressure and the stress. So it's not about taking jobs. It's about handling the workload better than what we could before.
Yeah, I agree. And your naysayers out there that make all the comments and that drive that narrative about it replacing jobs or all the other things that we hear, everybody reads those, they're out there. So I think one of the best things you can do is get ahead of it and keep reinforcing that it's not, and keep getting that information out there to take the focus off of that and onto what it really is doing for your center and your communities.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys. And as we start transitioning into QA, we have a few questions. Heather Bell from Escambia asked, you're mentioning a lot about law enforcement. Do any of your agencies handle fire and EMS for Aurelian-esque calls? I think it's both of you, so I'll let either of you talk.
So we don't really let it take fire or EMS calls. It's really important to us that if it's any type of fire or medical emergency, that is handled by a person. We do allow it to capture information if they have questions about, smoke detectors, replacing batteries, things like that. AVA can handle, but otherwise we're not utilizing it for that purpose.
I mean, we're similar. Most people who are calling about fire or EMS emergencies are calling 911, so they're not even going through Aurelian. But the ones that do, the way we have it set up, if it is a medical emergency or fire that's happening now, it does automatically transfer into the dispatcher. But we do get the calls of the open bonfire that they're just worried about, or the smoke detectors, things like that. My carbon monoxide detector needs replaced, but it's not going off right now. That it will handle, but for the most part, those are active in progress calls, so they come through to us.
Yeah, and the only thing I'd add there is for a lot of agencies, we're taking things like fire drills starting, we're taking things like burn permits, or even just people requesting information about burning laws, things like that. I have a funny story. One of our agencies, we were getting calls every day, and it was somebody saying I just want to let you know I'm burning. And so in the very beginning, this was about 2 years ago, we kept on thinking that they had a self-immolation problem, and we were escalating these calls as emergencies. And really in just the South, that's sometimes how people say, oh, we're starting a fire and we need to report a controlled burn. And so that's a lot of times information that we're collecting and getting into CAD. We also have another question from Emily. When you say the caller has an option to speak with a telecommunicator at any time, are they told how to do that at some point? Or is it just that they ask to speak to someone and the call will get transferred? And it's really the latter, where we end up transferring a call for a few circumstances. One, if we don't know how to help someone, the last thing that I want to do is lock them into the system, asking them questions that aren't valuable to them. And then the other is if somebody is just what we call non-compliant, they say I don't want to talk to a dispatcher, just give me a person, or I don't want to talk to AI, just give me a person. Agencies can kind of set that threshold for which we'll actually go and escalate that call. Usually it's 1 or 2 times we'll ask, hey, can you tell me a little bit more about what you need? And I can get you to the right person. And then we'll actually make that escalation. We have another question, which I think will be best directed to you all. Do you feel that because it is handling non-emergency calls, that it allows dispatchers to provide and meet user agencies' expectations of a higher level of service to them? From Nani, from Douglas, Nevada.
Yeah, I do. I think that our dispatchers and our, we have a backline for officers to call or responders to call if they need something, and we're able to handle those much more quickly. We're more patient because we're not rushed trying to handle other things. And I think even just the feedback piece of it that we get from Aurelian, we share that with our agencies, and that helps improve their community relations and how they're interacting with the community, because they wouldn't necessarily get that same feedback. So I think it's helped.
And I think the customer service also improves because they're not as rushed to get off these calls and get to other calls, or they haven't taken as many calls throughout the day that they've, the dispatcher might think were not as important or, more of a nuisance call. So their customer service is better towards the callers.
Mm-hmm. And something that is maybe secondary that we didn't initially expect is, since Aurelian is in play, the call takers are utilizing that, answering the 911s. It leaves some of our overflow people with phones that usually make outgoing calls because they're not having to answer that overflow, they're also free more to make those outgoing calls, to get the tow trucks going, to get the utility companies, maybe to call mutual aid for somebody. So it wasn't anything that we were initially even thinking about, but because they're not having to answer as much overflow, they're also free now not to have to rush off the phone with somebody to make those outgoing calls.
Well, great. Well, Leanne, Samantha, thank you as always for being part of the webinar. And Gwen, thank you for being part of your first webinar with us, talking a little bit about the community expectations. I really appreciate you three taking the time to talk a little bit about this. And with that, I'll let Lisa wrap us up. And also thank you to APCO for hosting it. And I thank you all for attending. I hope this was useful. If you have any questions or anything like that, we're always willing to talk about this, or see us at APCO in a few short weeks.
Thank you, Max. Thank you to all of our presenters, our sponsor, Aurelian, and thank you everyone for joining us today. This concludes our webinar.